giant. Once upon a time, there was a great big giant. Well, of course he was big, or he wouldn't be a giant, would he? No, of course not. All right, so he was a great big giant, but he wasn't a mean giant. He wasn't even an ugly giant. He was rather pleasant. He was very sweet and kind. He had a big red beard and red curly hair that sparkled like the sunshine, and eyes that were blue that twinkled like the midnight stars. And this giant lived in the forest, and every day he would get up in the morning and he would walk down the mountain into the valley where the little people live, the fairy folk. And he would help the little people, the fairy folk, with their chores. Because of course they were very little and he was very big. So, while they were trying to push big boulders to clear their fields, well, they were just little stones, and he would shoot them like marbles. Some days, they were trying to make the roads, and the great big giant would take his big giant feet and walk ever so carefully to flatten out the earth and make the roads. Well, one day, after the giant had done his chores for the morning, he went up the side of the mountain to take a nap. Oh yes, giants, like little people, like to take naps. And up in the forest on the side of the mountain, it was cool and dark. And so up he went with his big giant feet. And he found himself a nice moss-covered rock and put down his great big body and his head on the moss-covered. Sleep apnea. He was just gotten into a very good dream about sugar plum fairies and all of that, when all of a sudden, by his side appeared a great big fire-breathing dragon. Now, I don't know about you, but when I get woken from a nap with a fire-breathing dragon by my side, it's not very pleasant. And so the fire-breathing dragon breathed fire all over the giant. Well, it singed his beard and his hair, and he got up as quickly as he possibly could, which for a big fat giant wasn't that easy. And he began to run as quickly as he could. But right behind him was the fire-breathing dragon. Well, as fast as he could run, that dragon was right on his tail. And not only that, the dragon's tail was covered with sharp points, and his hands had claws on them, and on his back he had wings, so he could fly and maneuver much quicker than the giant. Now, the giant was really a peaceful, loving sort of fellow, but that dragon would not leave him alone, and he kept fighting biting and biting and scratching at him. And finally, when the dragon was nearly destroying the giant, he had no choice. He could not run, and he pulled from his side his great sword that he used to cut down the trees for the fairy people. And he swung this way and that way and all the way, boom! And he fell on the ground. And the dragon landed, boom! The dragon had died. But the giant, he was all scratched and covered with blood and burned and singed from the fire. And so the giant knew he had to get up and go down into the valley where the fairy folk lived. They would take care of him. So he got himself up and he walked down the side of the mountain. And every time he stepped, he flattened the plants beneath his feet, and little drops of blood fell to the ground. And up in those spots came new plants. They had long leaves shaped like the giant's sword, and tiny little white bells that smelled so sweet. Finally, when the giant got into the valley, he looked up the hillside, and there was a trail of little white flowers. And they were a gift from the fairy folk. And there's a song that they say, and it goes like this. White coral bells upon a slender star, lilies of the valley deck my garden walk. Oh, how I wish that I could hear them ring. That will only happen when the fairies sing. These are the little lilies of the valley that the fairies gave to remember how the giant had saved their lives. So, sometime you can look in your garden and see if you have lilies of the valleys. Any moms out there know if you have lilies of the valleys at your house? Oh yes, there's some lilies of the valleys. Very sweet smelling. But I will tell you one thing, and you listen carefully. Don't ever put the lilies of the valley in your mouth, because, like the dragon's breath, it's poison. So never ever put a lily of the valley in your mouth, all right?